All right, everyone. So welcome to this month's OTC webinar, and we're happy that you've joined us. The goal of our webinar today is why SLP, and we're going to unpack a lot of that as we go through. So we're excited to have you here. This is an exciting day for our office and for our team. SLP has been a program that we've worked on for a number of years as a part of our work in trying to figure out how, as an office, we support the University of Kentucky and the research infrastructure at the University of Kentucky more effectively. It's been a full team effort of everyone that's been involved with the Office of Technology Commercialization and ending today and now a functioning and up and running program around SLP to support UK startups. So we're really excited to dive into this. So we want to begin with the question of what is SLP? And so SLP stands for Startup License Program, and it is a program that is intended to support and to help companies and startups that have been formed specifically to commercialize UK IP. So if there's technology that's been developed from research at the university and a startup is formed to take that technology forward and to commercialize that technology, then that company would be a candidate for the SLP program. And what is the SLP? So SLP is a licensing program for licensing the technology to a startup, but more importantly, and most importantly, it's a program that provides advantageous license terms to the startup and that really forms a strategic partnership between the university and the startup company for the development and eventual commercialization of that IP. So UK is coming alongside the startup and looking to find ways and programmatically support the development of that IP and intentional development of that IP through the startup phase of the commercialization process. So we're going to dive into that a little bit in more detail. But before we dive into that in the more detail, I want to just look at the question of why SLP, and it's really a story of two numbers. And the first number is that historically, since the Bayh-Dole Act was passed back in the 1980s, where universities had the ability to commercialize technologies that were developed from federally funded research, UK has launched somewhere in the neighborhood of 200 or just over 200 startups. So that's a pretty significant number. But unfortunately, that number doesn't result in 200 active companies and 200 technologies that are moving into impact today. Unfortunately, less than 5% of those companies over UK's history have actually moved to the startup phase of securing investment capital. So they've maybe been able to get an SBIR, maybe two, maybe a whole bunch of SBIR grants, but they never seem to be able to make that next move into moving a product into the market and securing the capital that it takes post SBIR to really commercialize this technology. And that's our goal. Our goal with OTC and the University of Kentucky is not to form startups, it's to move technologies through a startup mechanism into the marketplace, creating impact. And it's through the programs like SLP that we hope to change these numbers, and we hope to see a much higher percentage of these startups and these technologies that are moving through this process result in product that's in the market and product that is making an impact for society. So why SLP? Another major change that has happened and that has really resulted, I think, in a lot of the numbers, the need for startups that we're seeing is that industry I'm sorry, somehow it appears that I've had a small technical problem, so hopefully you can still um, hear me now. So industry has largely moved to the point of innovation through acquisition. And what does that mean? So what it means is as we move technologies out into the marketplace, and we try to, as the Office of Technology Commercialization, approach corporates to potentially license the technology that has been developed through UK research. The feedback that we receive very often is that this is interesting, but it's something that is too early for us to consider. Come back to us when you have this or this or this types of tasks completed. And the reason for that is that um, the reason for that is that the technologies are still at an early stage, and they need some additional work to be done. So the startup, as a step in the process, the startup provides this capability. It provides the mechanism, and it provides an opportunity for funding for development of that technology to move from research to research and development, and then on to the development process. And through that process, what we're trying to do, we're not trying to launch companies that are going to compete with corporates. We're launching companies that are positioned, that are better positioned for those corporates to come in and acquire the company. So another part of this process is we really want to engage the corporates, the people that we're talking to about being potential licensees. We want to engage them in the R&D process. And so the startup provides the mechanism for us to be able to do that. So what you do is you would approach the corporate, you would talk to them about the technology, you would talk to them about the need in the market, and when they validate the hypotheses that you have about the fact that this technology could be beneficial in the marketplace, they may engage with you as strategic partners. They may engage with you as venture investors, and in a number of other ways that they could engage. And then when the technology gets to the point down the road where it's ready for them to bring it under the auspices of their company, then they can acquire the startup and the license to the IP to be able to move that technology forward. So SLP provides a streamlined process for us to help you move this technology from lab into the startup. And so we provide a number of services that help you as you begin to create a startup from the lab level research. And the types of things that we provide are help on things such as strategic planning, validation of the problem, helping you work on developing your business model, helping you understand the regulatory landscape and what would need to be done from a strategic perspective to move that technology through the regulatory landscape. That could be something like FDA if it's a medical technology, but there's a lot of other regulatory agencies that oversee technologies that are non-medical, and the regulatory aspect is just as important for those as it is for medical technologies. Obviously, with the startup formation, we can help you with that, not only with how to actually create the startup, but also some of the more nuanced issues of how to create a startup that's really positioned for commercialization of a deep tech technology, somebody that's going to go after SBIR, somebody that needs to have the accounting systems and processes and the governance and other things that need to be in place for this type of a company. So we can provide those kind of specific, that kind of specific help. Team building is huge. So whenever you're going to create a startup company around a deep tech technology, building a team and having the right people on that team is incredibly important. So helping you find those people, helping you structure those deals, and helping you understand the role of the UK innovator in this larger team that's commercializing this technology. All of those things are aspects of the process that we can support. and then startup fundraising, whether it's initially going after SBIR, or whether it's going after investment funding as the company progresses forward. We can help with all of those different steps. So ultimately, what we hope that you see with this process is UK making an investment into your startup, an investment into the startup process that will facilitate the long-term success of this IP. That's the magic of SLP. That's the real benefit of SLP. And as we move into talking about the benefits, the overarching benefit of SLP is this is UK working with you and making a long-term investment. So it's not, we end our engagement at the point that we're ready to form the startup, but that we realize that we need to walk with you and support this technology all the way through the startup process in order for it to reach the impact goal that we are all looking for. So how does SLP work? And so I'm sure you're all grabbing your cameras right now and scanning this QR code. This QR code is going to take you, it's going to take you to a PDF document that describes the SLP program. It's available on our website. You can also get to it using the URL here if you want to do that. The PDF is linked off of that URL page. And everything that I'm telling you in this webinar is reflected in that document. So I welcome you to do that. But at a high level, SLP is a two-step process. So we want to engage with you at the very beginning, as soon as the startup is formed, to provide an option to the technology for the startup to go forward, pursuing SBIR and other mechanisms, other early stage processes. And we'll do that through an easy option process. And we really try to keep this option process as streamlined as we possibly can. So low pain, low barrier to entry here to move into the SLP option. And then after a period of time under the option, and we've worked with you as you move through the option period, then you convert that to an exclusive license to the technology so that the startup fully secures the license to the technology. So the overall benefits package is a package that we value at $50,000, and that's $50,000 of value to the startup, and that's hard value. So you could argue that it's even bringing more value than that, but at minimum, we believe there's a value of about $50,000 to this package. So the first one, and the most important one, the one that you're probably going to be most excited about, is the waiver and deferment of IP expense reimbursement. And so that's a critical aspect of the program. The objective of that is that we don't want to take money out of the early commercialization processes and the early, when times are really lean under the startup, you have a little bit of SBIR funding, you have a little bit of maybe early investor capital. We want to help you get to the point where the technology is advanced by and reinvesting those funds or investing those funds into advancement of the technology rather than paying for some of these early IP expenses. So the university, again, will either defer some of those expenses or in the first part of them, waive some of those expenses for you. We also invest in a website development process or service. And the reason that we do that is we live in the world where if you don't have a website, you're not a real business. And so what we want to see is when you go out after SBIR and you start talking to people and corporates about your technology, we want you to have a website that is reflective of the current stage of your technology and that somebody can point to and they can learn a little bit. So obviously there's not going to be a ton of information on the website. We're still probably operating somewhat in a quiet mode where you're not sharing a lot of details, but we want you to have a landing page. We want the company to appear as a legitimate startup as you begin to go forward in those processes. You get guidance from business experts. So some of those are people that are on our team that have been working with startups and working with investors and working with SBIR and working with lots of other aspects of the startup and commercialization process. Some of those people are people that we'll bring in from the outside that can help you, that will be experts through some of the different programs that we offer. Participation in our UXL, XOR, MIR, UK Pitch, and other programs. So all of these are programs. We've had other webinars to talk about these programs, but these are all programs that are offered from UK that are intended to help startups at this stage. And so UXL is a program that provides a lot of that strategic planning and reimbursement and problem validation and the real strategic early steps. So that's a program that we highly encourage for you to look at. XOR, our Executives on Roster program, is a program that helps you find talent and bring talent into your startup. The MIR program, or Mentor in Residence program, that's a program where we help match UK startups with external mentors and help to bring the right resources to help you at the right time with your business. UK Pitch is an opportunity for you to travel perhaps to a conference of some kind, a commercialization focused conference where you can present your technology, and the first $1,000 of your travel expenses will be covered under the UK Pitch program. And then there's a host of other OTC programs as well. This is just the beginning of the types of programs and opportunities are available. And then finally, discounted space at UK's Aztec on-campus incubator facility. So oftentimes, this is the right, most convenient place for UK startups to come and form their company and do some of these early steps of the development process. You have laboratory space. You have lots of other facilities at the Aztec space that are really hard to find and very competitive, very convenient for UK faculty as they move into a startup. Also pleased to say here with the Aztec space that we have our new Aztec co-working space that you'll be hearing about soon. That's just getting stood up here at the Aztec facility. All right, so SLP, let's dig into the terms. So I think one of the things, well, there's two parts here that I think are the really key parts of this. One is that the terms are standardized, and two is that the terms are startup friendly. And I think you'll see that as we go through. So the first aspect here is that there's no upfront licensing fee. So there's no fee that's due at the initiation of the license. That's something that would be there in a standard license agreement that we waive for SLP. So I mentioned before the waiver and deferment of patent expenses. So here's a little bit more detail on that. So the first $10,000 of your patent expenses are waived under SLP, and the next $25,000 of patent expenses are deferred to a later time. The preferable royalty rates, and this is not just something that happens at the beginning, this is something that happens throughout the life of the license agreement, is that the royalty rates that we offer are preferable to what you would get under a standard license agreement. No annual minimum royalty payments for the first 3 years. So again, this is in line with this idea, much like with the waiver and deferment of patent expenses, is in these first couple of years when capital is precious, you're going after SBIR dollars, you're going after early investment dollars. We don't want those monies to be used to pay the university. We want those monies being invested into the technology and development of that technology. So for the first 3 years, there's no royalty payments that will be due, or at least no minimums, assuming that you're not selling the product at that point. No milestone payments are due. And then we do have an equity component of this, and we're going to talk in more detail about these last two bullets, but 6% equity in the company. The license will bear a 6% equity within the company, and that will be non-dilutive prior to the company being valued at a valuation of $2 million. Again, we're going to dive into that. And then with the SLP, there'll be diligence obligations, and we're going to talk in more detail about that. Okay, so the equity term, this is one that I want to take a few minutes and unpack, because I know for some people this might be scary. For some people, the language, and probably for a lot of people, the language around this is something that you're not used to seeing. So I want to just talk a bit about this. So the 6% equity that UK takes is founders equity. It's common stock equity that would be as a part of just like what all the other founders in the company are getting. But the non-dilutive aspect is one that raises some eyebrows, and I wanted to talk about that a little bit. Normally, if you were to come to me and say you have an investor that wants to invest and they want non-dilutive stock, I would tell you to run, because this is typically not in the best interest of the company. If this was purely non-dilutive equity, then I would tell you the same about this, but this is not purely non-dilutive. It's non-dilutive up to the point that the company is valued at $2 million. So what does that mean? What that means is that the company raises a funding round, and when the company raises that funding round, whenever you raise a funding round, there's a valuation put on the company. So this doesn't mean somebody has invested $2 million into your company. It means they've made an investment in your company based on the company being worth $2 million. So whenever you do an investment round, there's going to be some type of evaluation set on the company. And when that valuation exceeds the $2 million, then the university's equity piece dilutes, just like all of the other founders of the company and other equity shareholders of the company dilute. So we're in the same boat that you are after you get to that point. This $2 million valuation is a relatively low bar. So what we're saying here is what we really are looking for is a valuation and an investment that builds some corporate governance aspects into the company. So at that point, at the point that the company's been valued at around the $2 million range, you've probably started to have a board. You've probably got, well, you have external investors at this point that are on the cap table, that are, part owners of the company. So at that point, when you've got people outside the company that have ownership, and you've probably got some of these governance items being formed, that's the point where we say, now we're the same as everybody else, and there's no concerns here about dilution. So, and I'm happy to answer further questions about that if anybody has questions. The last thing that we want to do the deep dive here is on the diligence obligations. So again, I said that the SLP, it's a standardized agreement. So the only aspect of the SLP that is a negotiated term are the diligence milestones. And the point of these diligence milestones is for us, again, in a partnership role for you, to work with you and say, what are you realistically going to accomplish over the next 12 months, let's say. And we sit down and we talk with you one-on-one, and we say, what makes sense for your business in the next 12 months? What are the things that you would define as success over the next 12 months? And then we'll try to put those things into the milestones. So what we want to do is we want to work with you in a very close partnership way to help you execute on those milestones and to help you come up with some things that you should be working on that are going to position the company long-term for success. So for example, things that might be in the diligence milestones are things like securing SBIR or STTR funding, so some early startup funding, working on developing the business model so that you have an idea of who the customer is and what the value propositions are, what the key features, what problem is this solving in the marketplace. All of those types of things are things that would be things that are included in the business model. Validating the problem through customer discovery. So this is a really, really important step, is making sure that you're solving a problem that actually exists in the marketplace and you're not a solution looking for a problem. So these are things that we want to work with you very, very early on in the process and help you with that. So this is
oftentimes this is part of that engagement of corporates where we're working with them in a customer discovery mode and getting their feedback and getting their input and getting their help on these aspects of the business, and then developing that regulatory plan. So if you're developing a technology that does have regulatory oversight, having a clear understanding from the very beginning of the process of what that landscape looks like and what the likely path forward is, that oftentimes in deep tech commercialization, that oftentimes sets the timeline and the money and the exit and many other aspects of the commercialization process. So getting a good handle on what that is early on is helpful. So we're not saying here that these problems are going to be solved. What we're saying is that you're taking appropriate first steps in the first days of your startup of looking into these issues. And again, we're working with you side by side, helping you execute on these things. So what now? Hopefully you're all interested in the SLP program and interested in knowing more. So what I would encourage you to do if you're interested is to contact us. So I'll tell you to a person, the folks within the OTC team are here to help you. We're here to support you. And we want to work closely with you as you take these next steps. And so please feel free to reach out to any of us, and we're happy to help. So I always like to end my presentations with suggested reading. And so I'm going to end here on suggested reading, and we'll get to your questions. I'll quickly tell you why I chose this book. This is one of a number of books that I often recommend. And as you're thinking about things like SLP and forming a startup, this is a great resource for you. It's a 25 chapter book. Help on that particular topic. So it might be questions like, what type of company should you form? Should you form an LLC versus a C Corp? And other questions like that. Help me understand investors. Help me understand, different things. So there's 25 different very common topics for scalable startups, and they're all unpacked here chapter by chapter. So when we are live and in person, we've got a stash of these books that we're happy to hand out to you. But if not, and you want to get it soon, then check it out on your favorite bookstore. It's available in audio or in physical copy, however you prefer to consume books. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jackie and any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Eric, for a great presentation on what a startup license package is. We do have some questions. The first one is, can you talk about when the right time for someone to talk to OTC about an SLP is?
Sure. So what I would say is the SLP program is something almost from the very beginning of the time that you want to think about a startup, you would want to begin to talk about the SLP program. And so when do you think about a startup? Well, I think that's largely determined for deep tech. It's largely determined about pursuing the SBIR funding. So that's usually the time that we see people thinking about moving into forming a company, is so that they can apply for SBIR. And at the time that you apply for SBIR, I highly encourage that you come to our office and take an option under the SLP program to go out and pursue your IR. So we're happy to provide a letter of support that would be included in your SBIR that says that the company has rights to the IP that you're asking the federal government to pay to develop, which is always a good thing. And that whatever work that you're going to do on this technology, you'll continue to be able to have access to that IP as you go to move forward. So I think the first step for anything university research, deep tech related, is make sure that you have your IP locked down in the startup. And so it's one thing for our office to be filing the patents and protecting your IP, and you may be working with us on that, but making sure that your startup has rights to that IP is a really critical step.
Thanks, Eric. We have another question. What percentage of companies that spin out of the university make it to a $2 million valuation?
So I think companies that are taking the steps that we're going to work with you to take, and developing the business side in parallel with the technical side, I think that's a fairly low threshold to meet. So just as an example, this past year, our team worked with the Bluegrass Angels, Kentucky Enterprise Fund, and Commonwealth Seed Capital to run a program called KY 270, which was a pre-seed investment program. And so 6 companies in Kentucky received investments under the KY 270 program, including one UK technology. And those companies were all valued at $2.5 million as a part of that funding round. So it was a convertible debt funding round with a $2.5 million cap on the conversion, which is the de facto valuation. So again, those were very, very early technologies and companies. That's the type of a number that you would see with a pre-seed, a late pre-seed, or an early seed round of investment capital. I know I'm using some investment language here, but we can work with you on all that to understand that. But when you're going out and securing SBIR capital, and again, if you're using that SBIR money effectively, and you're doing it in a strategic way where you have your business model developed and you're working to de-risk this technology from a regulatory perspective, you're building a team around it, all the things that we want to work with you under the SLP program to do, a $2 million valuation bar is pretty low.
Great. Can you talk about what the difference is between an SLP license and a non-SLP license?
Sure. So the SLP program is designed specifically for working with UK technology startups, and particularly startups that are commercializing UK technology. If you were to take a license that was not designed or not under the SLP program, that was intended more for a corporate type of an engagement, there you might expect reimbursement of patent costs. You might expect minimum royalty payments. You might expect upfront license payments. There are a number of other things that would be expected. There would be much more aggressive diligence milestones that would be tied to that. And again, the intention there is that the licensee is a more sophisticated licensee that has the capital behind them to really invest in this technology. And if they're not investing in the technology in this way, then that probably indicates something, as a corporate. But a startup is different. A startup doesn't have those kinds of resources, and a startup needs to be spending those resources in different ways. And so that's why we've worked to develop the SLP program.
Thank you. Another question, which is better, a license or a startup?
So this is an interesting question, and it's one that we get all the time. And it's a bit of a, I guess it's a bit of a misnomer that you have to choose. So when we talk about license in the context of this question, what you're probably thinking here is licensing to a corporate, as opposed to going through a startup. And the truth is that if there's an option, if there's an ability, I don't want to misuse terms here, if there's an ability to license a technology to a corporate. So you have talked to a corporate has said, we are really interested in this. This falls in line with an active area of research that we have ongoing. Certainly in the event that this was an industry-sponsored research program where they have an interest in bringing that technology in-house, then that is by far the best case scenario and the lowest risk from the technology's perspective scenario. But as I said earlier, what often happens is we go out and approach corporates with the technologies, and they say, this is interesting, but it's too early. We really need a number of things done in order for this to be something that we can invest in as a licensor. And in those things, in some cases they're technical, but in some cases they're not. In some cases they're, as I mentioned earlier, there's the stage of being in research, and then going from R to R&D, and then going from R&D to D, for more of a development type mode and market launch. Some corporates want that technology all the way through to the point of market launch, and some of the risk that they want to see removed is actual success in the marketplace. Some corporates are interested in engaging earlier than that, but they still need to see, for example, some progress on the regulatory pathway. And there may be some strategic value there in doing that. There may be some strategic value, and part of the reason that we see corporates having moved to the innovation through acquisition process is that it's lower risk for them. They don't have to put their name behind something that may not succeed. Your startup's name is the one that goes behind the thing that may not succeed. And if it doesn't succeed, then their name isn't, tarnished. It also gives you the ability, or gives them the ability. The startup has the ability to be much more nimble and has the ability to move more quickly, to pivot, to seek different capital, to exercise certain opportunities that a corporate may not be able to do. And just because of the speed of the organization and some of the decision-making processes, it may be much harder for them to be able to execute on those things. So they would rather, very often, they would rather work with you through the startup phase as an advisor, as a strategic partner. They may provide in-kind services. They may provide access to certain proprietary technologies and capabilities. All of these different things to help you move that technology forward, but still doing it independently under your startup, because there are advantages to both parties of doing that. And then at the right time, they can make the move to bring you in the form of an acquisition.
Great. The SLP license seems to be targeted at licensing a single technology to a startup. What happens if there are multiple technologies that could go to the same startup? For example, does each technology end up at an additional 6% of the startup?
I would not expect that each technology would be an additional 6%, but that's something that we would need to look at and engage other people on the team in that. But I would not expect that it would be that way. I would expect that it would all be rolled under one SLP is probably what would happen. But again, I would need to talk with others, and we would need to have others involved in those specific conversations. But I think at a high level, if there are two complementary technologies that rightfully belong under one startup, then that's most likely the method that we want to go forward. And again, what I would say is the goal of SLP is for us to support you and work with you and see your company be successful. And ultimately, in a scenario where the university or other people own too much equity in the startup, at some point that becomes a disadvantage to success of the startup. So the 6% number is a fairly low number, and it's one that, I mean, it's a very low number. You could argue that it's a very low number, but it's definitely one that is not going to be a disincentive to future success of the company. We certainly want the founders to be incentivized to succeed. And as you work through the early stages of investment capital, that's a really critical step as you're going through the pre-seed and seed rounds of investment, that the founders remain incentivized by having a very large, usually a controlling piece of the equity, and remain in control of the company. As you move into a Series A and beyond with venture capitalists, that process begins to change. But in the early days, it's incredibly important that the founders remain incentivized, and I think SLP does that.
What effect does an SLP agreement have on the royalty payments to the UK inventors? Does the 6% UK share in the company translate to additional royalties, or is that not included in the royalty sharing program?
My understanding is that any income that's received as part of the equity would be distributed through the royalty sharing plan. I would need to confirm that with others, but that's my understanding.
We have another question. If you have to form a small business to qualify for SBIR, STTR funding, then who owns the license? Is it the investigator who works for UK and is forming the new business, or UK?
Well, so any technology that's developed through UK research is owned by the university. So that's independent of SLP. That's UK policy on ownership of IP. So the university owns that IP, and the university has the responsibility to determine how best to commercialize that IP and what that looks like. So the mechanism for a technology to move for rights to commercialize that technology and to use that IP to transfer that outside of the university is through a license. And so the university retains ownership of the IP, but the university licenses use of that IP to another company, either a corporate or a startup, for future development, further development, and commercialization of the IP. But typically speaking, the university retains ownership of the IP.
Thank you, Eric. Can you provide some examples of the diligent milestones?
Sure, absolutely. So again, I think what we do with the diligence milestones is we want to sit down and work with you. Our goal, and let me just say this, our goal is not that we're negotiating SLP as a first meeting. Our goal is that we would have been involved with you through our programs, through protecting the IP. You would have been engaged with our office and working with Matt Upton and team on protecting the IP. We would be working with you in many, many other ways up to the point that you decide to pursue SBIR and consider an SLP. But at that point, as part of our ongoing conversations about what's the strategy and the proper way forward for your IP, then we would work with you on just putting together a list of deliverables that you want to accomplish and that we agree with you are in the best interest of the technology in terms of moving this forward during the period of the option. So it's normally a time limited 12 months, 18 months, something like that. And we would say, what are some realistic things that can and should be accomplished that will move this technology forward during this 12 to 18 month period. So again, that could be understanding of the business model. It could be validation of the problem through talking to corporates. It could be building the team. It could be pursuing and securing startup funding. So any of those types of things. And we would normally have 2 to 3 things that we would put on the list of things that we would want to see accomplished. But I think it's important to know that they won't just be technical. So but the purpose of SLP is to see this technology move forward. And from our experience, and back to those, the numbers that we started the presentation with, the 200 versus 5%, the difference, between being one of the 200 that don't move forward and being some of the small few that do, is doing the non-technical parts of the business development process in parallel with and along with the technical development. So obviously the technical has to continue, but if you don't put the time into developing the team, understanding the regulatory strategy, developing the business model, all of these types of things, then ultimately at the end of the day, you haven't increased the value of the company. The company won't reach that $2 million valuation, and and there's still just tremendous amounts of risk. So our goal with the diligence milestones is to help you achieve those goals.
Great, Eric. One last question. Can you talk about a little bit more in depth on the programs you mentioned and how they're beneficial to a startup?
Sure. So we have a host of programs that are available to startups, and all of those programs are designed to help you understand the path forward and to help you execute on that path forward. What we find oftentimes in working with clients is they want to see things go forward, but the startup world is an entirely new language, and it can be very scary. And so one of the things that we like to do is to work very closely with you to provide the right support at the right time and to help you with whatever the challenge is of the day, to help you go forward. And the first program that we'll likely talk to you about is the UXL program, which is a program that's really designed to help you from the earliest days post-disclosure to try to figure out what is that path forward and try to help you develop that vision for the future of where should this technology go. And really that program is best suited before you think about doing something like startup formation and SBIR, because what we're going to do through that program is help you understand and develop messaging around how your technology solves a problem in the marketplace and for who in the marketplace. Who is that customer segment? Who is going to pay for this product? What team needs to be involved? What does the commercialization process look like? Is it a 3-year primarily SBIR funded process, or is it a 15-year, $50 to $100 million process to move this technology into the market? And through the university, we deal with everything in that spectrum. Literally across the board, we deal with things that are on that back end, and we deal with some things that are faster to market on the front end. But you as the entrepreneur have to know what does your commercialization process look like for your technology. And so UXL program is designed to be very customized and very hands-on way for us to help you figure that out and develop that plan around your technology. Once you know that, then when you go to apply for your SBIR, all of the questions that they're asking you are very easily answered because you've spent the time doing that work. And then the other part of that is that the technical aims are things that are aligned with that strategic plan. So if you've learned and you've heard from feedback from corporates that you need to solve, problem 1 and 2, but problems 3 through 5 are lower impact, well, that the focus of your SBIR should be 1 and 2. Any money that you put into 3, 4, and 5 is wasted at that point. wasted time and wasted money. So those types of things are incredibly helpful for you. And again, we try to solve those things through programming. We have other programs that help you with other aspects as well, as I mentioned earlier.
Thanks, Eric. We had one more question that came in while you were answering that question. So I wanted some clarification. Is royalty applicable to investment received from financial institutions?
I guess I'm going to have to make an assumption here. Is investment capital subject to royalty? And assuming that that's what was intended by that question, then the answer would be no. Investment capital is not revenue, and royalty would be taken off of revenues. So investment capital doesn't come in as revenue and wouldn't be subject to royalties.
Thank you, Eric. That's our last question. We'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. If you have additional questions that you think about later, please feel free to email us at otcinfo@uky.edu. We will also be posting this recording on our YouTube channel, so you can check it out there again. And make sure you sign up for our next webinar in April. Matt Upton, our Senior Associate Director for Intellectual Property Development, will be talking about patents, copyrights, and trademarks, and letting you know how to know the difference between those and when to know when you need one. We appreciate you being here, and thank you all for coming.